Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Titanfall for PC, Xbox 360, and Xbox One. This is a first-person shooter by Respawn Entertainment and published by EA in March of 2014 for PC and Xbox One, and it later saw release on Xbox 360. And it was pretty interesting because we didn't really know all that much going into E3 2013 about this thing other than Respawn was working on a sci-fi FPS. And then they debut it at the Microsoft press conference of that year's E3, and it was pretty impressive. It was basically the most impressive thing that Microsoft showed off that year. And it was just a massive breath of fresh air because we had so many modern military FPSs by that point that we just didn't give a crap anymore. And thus something like this comes along, where it has fairly similar mechanics in terms of its shooting mechanics, but it's all sci-fi, and there's giant mechs, and you're running on walls, and you got jump packs and cloaking and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. It looked really interesting. And so, with this massive breath of fresh air, how did they actually pull the game off? Is it really as good as they made it out to be, or did something else happen? As far as the presentation goes, it's kind of interesting, actually. Believe it or not, this actually runs on the Source engine. Kind of hard to believe, isn't it? It doesn't look like a Source engine game, nor does it feel like one, because, as you know, with most of the Source engine games, they kind of have the same movement feel. It's a bit floaty. They tend to have the same weapon handling and things like that. But this one doesn't really have any of that. It feels like its own thing, and like it was actually built on a completely different engine, believe it or not. And it kind of looks completely different from Source engine games too, because we've come to expect a certain look and feel from those, and you just don't get it here. That said, it's not all that impressive. I mean, the texture quality in particular is just kind of average. It's not amazing, but it's certainly enough to get the job done, and it doesn't look bad. The modeling is really nice, and so is the animation, which is really smooth and fluid. Everything chains together really well, and there's just a lot of detail in both the environments and in the characters and the Titans. But despite it being a bit underwhelming in terms of being a next-gen game in terms of its visuals, the art style works fairly well for it, and the sound design is also pretty solid as well. Though I wouldn't really say it's worth the 36 gigs or so that the audio files take up. The only major issue with the sound is that the music is actually pretty forgettable. And I say it's forgettable because I never notice it when I'm playing. It is there, but I never notice it. I'm too caught up in what's actually going on to really give a crap about the music. And when you actually do hear it, it's usually during the intro sequences to the levels, or it's the menu, and you just don't really give a crap either. So it's kind of a missed opportunity there, that they don't really have anything to show off the music per se. But at least the voice acting, for the most part anyway, is pretty solid stuff. Apart from the guy who is the IMC commander, I have no idea what his accent is supposed to be. The only thing I can guess that would be even close, I guess, is South African. And he just has this really weird way of saying just about everything. And unfortunately, it actually gets kind of annoying to hear him babble. At least the rest of the cast is certainly alright. They're not amazing, but they play their characters decently, well, what little there is to play. But I'll get to that in a moment. And they're accompanied by sound effects that, while not being the beefiest around, are certainly solid enough that it doesn't become a detriment to it. I would have liked a bit beefier gun sounds in particular, because only a couple of the weapons really sound powerful, but that's kind of it. Everything else sounds mostly alright. What happens to really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is that you play as one of two factions fighting out in the frontier of space in the colonies that are out there. And that's really as far as the story goes, because even though there is a campaign, I don't really know what's going on in it. It's basically just the militia are trying to fight against the tyranny of the IMC, and that's kinda it. I don't really know what's going on. I don't know who these characters are. I don't know why they're doing necessarily what they're doing. They give only the barest hints of any sort of motivation other than just, the IMC is doing bad things. Therefore, we must fight them because they are being evil bastards. And that's it. So, you don't really know who any of the characters are. They just kind of sit there and babble to you over the intercoms while you're playing the matches. And the campaign itself is just a bunch of missions strung together. Whether you're playing hardpoint domination or attrition, it's basically the same thing as just going into either the attrition or hardpoint domination playlists. And it's really a shame, because they could have done stuff with a campaign here, and even though it is multiplayer, they could have done something that actually had a true plot to it, and instead they just kind of made this jumbled mess that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But of course, when the story fails, you turn to the gameplay, and this is where things get pretty interesting, because you're playing as a pilot, whether you're playing as the IMC or the militia. And that means that you get access to Titans, which are these large mech tanks, basically. And they're very agile, they have a dash move, and you can move them around pretty well. They're supposed to be considered as a full extension of the pilot, rather than just this thing that you're piloting around. And so it controls differently from when you're moving around on the ground, because when you're on the ground, you have that jump pack, you can run on walls, and it's very smooth and fluid, and it works really well for the most part. You can actually build up momentum as you're running along too, and basically launch yourself forward. So that gets pretty cool, and the gameplay can be very fast-paced as a result. It's not quite as ridiculously fast as something like, say, Tribes, but it's certainly a lot faster than what you're used to after playing basically any FPS since Call of Duty 4. But while those shooters have their place, we were missing something fast-paced like this, and it's certainly nice to have it back. But it's not all about speed. You have to have other things to complement that speed in order to have a functioning and good game. So what about the rest of it? Well, you're playing a bunch of team-based objective modes, and it's 6v6. So what you're going to find is that you're going to be running around and having all these grunts and specters and such on the match if you're playing, say, attrition, where the objective is to basically just cause as much damage to the enemy as possible by eliminating grunts, specters, and of course pilots and titans. And you'll find that other modes are basically left in the dust compared to this. The only two modes that really actually have a huge amount of effort put into them are attrition and hardpoint domination, which is basically just domination, only you've got grunts and specters running around in addition to the pilots and the titans. And so the variety is pretty limited, and one of the biggest problems here comes into play, and you're going to see it in this bit that I'm showing you right now. The player count on PC is very low, and it's actually kind of disturbing that the game has had such a huge reduction in players in such a short time. And so that begs the question, well, why does that happen? Well, for a variety of reasons. While they did add in private match support at one point, it wasn't there at launch, and other issues that were at launch actually still persist. There's one particular glitch that somebody pointed out that I don't want to go too far into, that has been there basically since launch, and they never addressed it, even though it's a pretty big exploit. And while they did do some tweaks here and there to balancing, it didn't really do a huge amount to bring people back. And it really didn't help that they had a season pass there as well that added a couple of map packs. And while they did offer those for free recently because of the 1-year anniversary, it didn't really do a huge amount to bring a lot of players back. And so what you'll find is that if you're not playing at prime time, the player count's pretty low, and the matchmaking has a bit of a hard time actually finding you a game unless you're actually playing just attrition, which is basically the go-to mode for this anyway. But it's just a shame, because some of the other modes are actually pretty cool. But you never really get a chance to play them, and some of them I only played once, so I just haven't really had much of a chance to really evaluate them. But they're cool ideas, and it's a shame that people don't flock to them. It's kind of like if you play Call of Duty these days. Basically all you can find is people playing Team Deathmatch, and nothing else. It's kind of depressing, actually. And there's certainly more comparisons to be made to Call of Duty, namely the weapon handling. It feels a lot like Call of Duty, and it makes sense considering that Respawn was founded by Jason West and Vince Zampella, who basically were the head honchos over at Infinity Ward when they were making Call of Duty 4 and Modern Warfare 2. So the weapon handling does end up being very familiar and very easy to pick up, but at the same time, it's just kind of the same thing you're used to. So it makes sense in an environment where you're playing a fast-paced game like this that you don't want a huge amount getting in the way of accuracy, because you got people jumping around like crazy and at ridiculous heights and everything. So you want them to be able to actually hit stuff, but at the same time, it'd be nice to have some, well, recoil on some of the weapons. But that's not really the biggest problem with the weapons. The biggest problem is that while they're functional and they're decently balanced for the most part, cough, smart pistol, cough, the weapons themselves are just stuff you're used to. You got an assault rifle, 2 different kinds of submachine guns, a machine pistol, a revolver, a semi-automatic pistol, a sniper rifle, a DMR, which is basically a semi-automatic sniper rifle, an LMG, and a shotgun. And that's pretty much it. The only weapon that's really unique is the smart pistol, which is just a pistol that locks onto up to 5 targets at once, or locks onto a single target with all of those bullets, and you can just press the fire button and it will basically just instantly kill whatever you've aimed at. Now this may sound overpowered, and it kind of is, because you can just farm all the grunts and such with incredible ease and get access to your Titan almost immediately, as opposed to the other people who actually have to put a bit more effort into it. And when you're going up against other players with the smart pistol, it makes it pretty much easy mode, because you can just lock onto them, and as long as they don't just annihilate you in seconds, then you pretty much got this fight in the bag. It's a real shame, actually, because it's a cool idea, and I feel like it could be balanced out if they only had it target grunts or specters rather than the players as well, because that's just kind of cheap. And in a game where you have these Titans running around as these huge mechs with really powerful weaponry, you would expect that to unbalance the game as well, but oddly enough, they have more balancing between troops and armor than they do with troops versus troops. It's really bizarre. The anti-Titan weapons you get, the one you start with, the Archer Heavy Rocket, is just ridiculously powerful and very good against them. And as long as you keep moving and don't allow the Titan to actually hit you, you can take down a Titan relatively easily as a pilot. Whether you're just using, say, an Archer Heavy Rocket or the Sidewinder, which I've never really found a huge use for, or things like that, or you're actually getting on the back of the Titan doing a rodeo attack, which actually can do a lot of damage as long as they don't activate electric smoke to kill you while you're on there, or they get out of their Titan in order to bring you down. So oddly enough, you don't really feel all that cheated when, say, a Titan kills you, but whenever somebody with a smart pistol kills you, it makes you irritated. And it's really bizarre, because you would expect, again, to get more angry at the Titan, but you don't. So what they've done is they've created a game in which the balancing is mostly fine apart from that one weapon. And it just gets kind of irritating when a lot of people are using it, because when you go into attrition mode, there's a lot of people using the smart pistol most of the time. Now, the general policy that you'll find is that people will just not use it. They will choose not to use it if they're a more experienced player, because it's just easy mode, and it's boring at that point. I've used the smart pistol myself. It's boring. So going with the other weapons is just more fun, more engaging, more challenging. And if you want a real challenge, then use one of the weapons that requires precision, like the semi-automatic rifle, or the burst rifle, or the sniper rifles. But whether you decide to take easy mode or go the more challenging route, there is one glaring issue with this game overall. There is a distinct lack of content overall, so what content you do have is generally pretty well polished, apart from the smart pistol, but when you get to the actual amount of the content, I don't really feel like there's enough to justify a full $60 release. Now, since then it's gone down in price, and I can very easily recommend it at that price. It's a fun game. When you actually do get into a game, because the matchmaking can be a bit messy, it's generally not very laggy, it doesn't crash, there's almost no bugs of any description. I haven't seen any, whether I'm playing on a crappy computer or the new rig. It doesn't matter, it runs really well and plays really well. So while there's not a huge amount of content, and they tried to supplement this with things like burn cards, which give you a slightly different twist on things, like you'll use a burn card in order to give your Titan an explosion effect when you actually eject from it, or you'll use it to get more powerful versions of various weapons. One of my favorite ones to use is the amped wingman, which is the revolver. Basically removes the fire rate cap on it. So you basically turn it into the Desert Eagle from Call of Duty 4. But anyway, they add some variety, but not really enough to make it, again, worth that $60. And since there's no server browser, you have to rely on the matchmaking. Now, from what I can tell, it does actually use dedicated servers, and the netcode is very solid. So the real issue is just there's not a huge amount of content in here to keep you coming back. But what is there is fun! It's a really weird dilemma, and it's something I really hope they fix in Titanfall 2, because they have announced a sequel, and I feel like this is all stuff that could be very easily ironed out by the time they get to Titanfall 2. Because again, what is here is fun, it just doesn't last. So, at a lower price point, I can very easily recommend it. But that $60 price point it launched at, just not worth it. If it had been launched at, say, 40 or 30 bucks, then I can see it being a lot more justifiable. But full price, not so much. Especially not with a single player campaign at all, or single player of any kind, apart from the training mode. So overall, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.